Knuckles was running directly into crowds, fist first, to keep them dispersed. It was making the berserkers a little envious. It turned the situation into a sort of a competition. It was hard to tell at times who was putting the most punks down. There were already 20 to 30 people crawling away moaning, and the group was no closer to figuring out how to get away. Knuckles had been doing a good job keeping their mobs broken up so they couldn't regroup. It was turning into a battle of attrition, and Luxon's group was more for bursts of fighting, not sustaining this long. One was fighting with a staff, several others had axes. It was a good thing because several of the punks had started donning metal bars, machetes, and hammers. Luxon knew it was only a matter of time before bricks and rocks would get thrown in and gunshots would ring out. Then it would get horrible. He knew he had nowhere near enough ammo for more than a few of them, and that'd be it, but if there was any way to go, this was it. As he fought and swung his sword for another breath, he heard spray, and two of his guys on the left went down. They'd been pepper sprayed and tried to swing for a few more seconds before going down. They tried to close ranks and cover the two before they could get dragged down into obscurity, beaten, and stabbed to death. That maneuver left them too thin, though, and they were starting to get flanked by a wedge maneuver. Knuckles had a big one on the ground and wouldn't stop punching. The punks were trying to pull the guy away from Knuckles, but couldn't. Luxon got behind Knuckles and dragged him back into the formation before he could get flanked. "Help us hold the line," Luxon yelled. Knuckles seemed to sort of understand, but not really. There were two more coming in fast, and he jumped between them with both fists out before they could react, and down they went. Luxon just shook his head and pulled Knuckles back up again. "Watch my back." That seemed to sort of make sense to Knuckles, but there were too many a moment later, and he got piled on. He swung and swung, but they were trying to pin his arms. Luxon turned to see Knuckles down and tried to get the guys off him. He heard more pepper spray and thought this was probably it, and then a body slammed into him and he went down. That's when he heard screaming behind him. Blood-curdling screams. Chapter 18, Knuckles holds on. Late evening. Knuckles was buried in bodies, the combination of too heavy to get off him. Both of his arms were pinned, and he was struggling to get an arm, leg, or loose. He thought Luxon was going to help him, and then someone smashed into Luxon also. As he wrestled, trying to get everyone off him, he heard screaming. It wasn't screaming from someone that he had hit. It sounded like someone had been cut. Adrenaline fought through all that. This was stark, raving fear. It was pouring rain right now, and it seemed to make these people on him even heavier. He pushed with every ounce of his might, trying to wiggle free. A car tried to push their way through, but was immediately stopped. Punks started trying to bang on it, trying to get in. Where there was a first scream, seconds later was a second scream. The guys piled on Knuckles lost their focus for a second, and he let the bigger guy have it hard. The guy didn't like that at all and struggled to get up and away, the arm now free. This threw the other guy that was on Knuckles' chest off balance. The momentum of him losing his balance landed him directly into another punch from Knuckles. As he struggled to free his legs, a crowbar came down towards Knuckles' face. He was able to block it with his steel-bolted dusters, and the shock caused the assailant to drop it. Knuckles got it and swung it around so he could free his legs. The guy at his legs didn't like the crowbar so close to his face, and Knuckles was able to crawl away to free Luxon. As Knuckles freed Luxon, he heard a third scream and a fourth. Something was going on the other side of the brawl perimeter. There was no time to wonder, and Knuckles struggled to pick Luxon up, which he used his cane as support for his other leg. The screaming had turned many of the punks' heads, and thus lost momentum for a few precious seconds. It was a deer-in-the-headlights sort of moment, with all kinds of imagination trying to figure out what would cause the screams when they were so close to beating down these so-called fascist white supremacists. As they gawked, some objects flew into their faces as they tried to wipe the stuff off, only to start screaming. Knuckles didn't need an invitation and crashed right back into them, leaving the crowbar behind. Luxon started attending to his wounded, explaining that they need to make one last push. Everyone got up and rubbed their eyes using the rain. It helped a little, but not much. With one last breath, they all yelled, "Valhalla!" and met with Knuckles, crashing into the mob. Chapter 19, Malaise, Even the Odds, Night. It was pouring down rain now, but that wasn't diluting her special sibs. If anything, the water was mixing with the cold sweat and getting into their eyes and pores even easier. Even goggles were useless as the splats got on the goggles, covering them up only to get hit by a second volley of splats preceded by screams of burning. Where the spray would be mostly defeated by the pouring rain, the sibs retained most of their chemical balance as they splattered onto people. People tried to wipe it off, only to smear it around. It was working really well. If it got too close, she'd slap him in the face. By now there was a concentrated film of it on her hands. She smelled like sickly sweet death as she waded through the bodies of the screaming. Any that were still standing got one tossed in their face, underhand style. Anyone who were on the ground that weren't swollen enough got a saturated glove rubbed all over their face. She kept this up until there was a surge of bodies towards her. She was immune to the effects of her sibs and the spray flying around due to her mask, but she wasn't immune to this. She tried to step back and stumbled. People fell everywhere as they got plowed over by the barbarian-looking guys, and she got piled up in the bodies. She felt her hands to see if they still moved, and they did. She felt the special gloves that she ordered online to protect her from chemicals, and they were working very well. It fit the theme, she had thought. They were coming in very useful as she tried to climb up and out of the bodies. She grabbed fresh sibs from her bags, feeling that these were the last ones. Then all she'd have left is her carbine takedown and some hope. Knowing that, she smeared them on everyone's faces as she got up, and they started screaming as their faces contorted involuntarily. Nah. She had a sudden thought. What if their messed up faces were permanent? It made her giggle, and right then she realized she was about to get plowed next as she tried to stand up. Instead of getting plowed, though, one of the barbarian-looking dudes stopped and said, "Wow, sick costume, dude." She realized that they didn't recognize her. She lifted her mask up by the beak and winked at them and then pulled her mask back down. The aroma of the combined gases was damp but potent and very present. The look on their faces was priceless. "She is the barista," they all repeated and admired her with great reverence. A guy tried to get up that apparently wasn't sauced enough, and she reached down and put the sib that was in her hand right in his mouth, and he screamed and then started gurgling in pain. That got a good laugh from one of the berserkers, and Malaise thought she recognized the one causing the tink-tink noises. Malaise thought, was that the other guy from the cafe? The one who got my tips back? She realized it was. She hoped that these people would be her friends. "Guys, the road's completely blocked and too narrow. We need to take the construction road. Do you all have vehicles?" They nodded, taking steps back from her as if she was toxic. Meow, meow. Darcy walked up to Malaise, dragging her pack along with the garbage bags in a shopping cart she had found. The cart also contained some loot she had been scavenging from the unconscious rioters. Malaise noticed some of the good guys were bleeding. "You guys are bleeding pretty bad. I got something for that." They hadn't noticed they were bleeding. Malaise dug through Darcy's garbage bags for a second, and Darcy said, "Hey." Malaise pulled out a bag of pads that were specifically designed to soak up blood. She tossed them from the package and cinched the garbage bag back up. "Distribute those, and hurry and get in your cars. Put them on the bleeding parts of you." Malaise's words were stumbling, as she didn't really have medical training. Only knew what to happen if something really bad chemically happened. The heathens had all gone through first aid, so they immediately recognized what she was trying to say. It was pouring, and these disruptive effects weren't going to last long on the mob. The heathens started handing out the pads she provided. Malaise got their attention again. "Guys, do you trust me?" They all nodded. "Let's go. Get in your vehicles and get them turned around. We're leaving." Before they departed, she saw Knuckles and the first guy from the cafe. She now understood, being named Luxon, having a brief conversation. She saw Knuckles pull out a device and start punching in numbers. They both pressed buttons a few times, and Knuckles nodded. Knuckles, Malaise, and Darcy got back to his vehicle with Tom, who had kept the vehicle running. Chapter 20. Team leaves Sealth. Night. Knuckles took his bolted dusters off and tapped on the truck's windows with Tom inside. "We have some new passengers." Tom nodded and unlocked the doors. They threw their gear in the crew cab and climbed in. Tom was a little startled, as it was a homeless person and a guy with a bird beak mask. "What's going on, Knuckles?" Tom asks. "We're getting out of here. Follow their directions. Don't move too fast. We have several friendlies following us." "Heck to the yeah," Tom said.